All right, I'm going to go through a few things today. I'm going to go through a couple of these study sheets or study guides that Paul has created. Uh, we're going to go over chapter 6, which is by far the longest chapter in the book. It's about 75 pages long. All right, and I've also begun work. I don't know if I've got it up here or not. Let's see, do I? On the site that I hope that we're going to be able to create. Let's see. Show you what it looks like right now. Tony should like it because look who got first dibs. All right. So, we'll be able to go in there and eventually we can add all of the teams. All right. But for now, when we go in there too, when you go in and go to the console here, and every time you come in and you buy, well, I gotta move that up. So come on, move up.
What does the RAM tab say?
What's that?
The RAM.
Oh, the RAM one does, because I didn't change it. I couldn't find RAMs on this site that had these. So, but when I do that, it'll bring this up, and it'll have all of the information in there. So as you can see, the ID of this one is 1. It's a Pat's hat. The price will be $20. Don't worry about the 2,000. And quantity is 1. And as I keep going in there, I can go and I can add more to it as well. All right. The idea is we'll first build that on totally or solely on the client side using just CSS, HTML, and jQuery. Then we will move it over and we will have a database full of this stuff and actually build an ASP.NET app with it. All right. Okay. So I'm looking at the stuff that's here, and I think at least some of this will help. The other thing I'd like to do today is I'd like you to take that written test. Remember, there's 4 questions. I already gave you the questions. But one of those questions is, what is an ORM? So if you look on the screen here, an ORM is an object relational mapping framework. And basically what it does is it's designed so that you can write code and have it create databases for you. Question?
Is this open node type of reference?
Yes. As it says there, they hide the actual SQL that's executed. The idea is at least some people who end up creating these systems don't know a lick about databases, and they don't have to. All right. And going the other way, if they already have a database structure created, they don't really have to know how to set it up. So if you do the database first, you get the benefit that way. If you do the code first, you get it the other way. As it says, without an ORM framework, the developer has to code all the raw SQL queries into the application himself or herself. All right. We talked a little bit about these model classes. I don't want to say any more about them. You should be able to take a look at what's on the screen right here. That should make sense to you. All right. We've also talked data annotations. Again, there's really nothing there that should surprise you. If you look at the example that's right there, what do we have? First, you know that you've got to add that using statement that adds system.componentModel.data annotations. And this one, all it says is rather than category name, again, if you look right here, I guess they don't show it here, but category name would naturally go in as one word. Since it would go into the database as one word, it would show as a heading as one word. But by changing the display property here and adding that data annotation, it'll now be 2 words. There's other things that you can put in here too. If you notice, okay, as it says right here, it says sometimes let's see. It says sometimes the assumption does not hold up. You can add a table attribute to force the table to have the correct name. So here the name of the table is going to be departments. Why is that important? If you look up on the screen here, that by default it's going to be department. And again, it may not sound like a big thing. What if somebody just fat-fingered and spelled it wrong? and no one wants to change it. So what if they left the E off of here? You know what I'm saying? As an example, you could go in here and change it. All right. This is basically saying that that field is the primary key. With some of these data annotations, the reason you're using them is you're leaving no doubt. You're taking total control over what gets printed, how it gets printed, and what means what. Says if one of your tables has a composite key. What's a composite key? Come on, you should know this. In some ways, it's on the screen right now. It's a primary key that consists of more than one field. All right. So it says if you've got a composite key, you need to apply the key and the column attributes to every property that's part of the key. So it says that field will come first, that one will come second. They're both primary keys. The DB context, this shouldn't be a big thing to any of you anymore. Hopefully it's something that you're at least comfortable enough with. Remember that this context, you can call this whatever you want, but it has to inherit from DB context. All right. This right here and right here are going to be the names of your tables. This is what you're going to call them in here. We talked about the connection string. You know what that is now. Nothing big there. All right. If you want an explanation of everything that's in that connection string, you can look on screen. I know we went over part of this the other day, but since some of it's on the test, I decided to do it again. You know that the app data folder contains databases by default. You can right mouse click on that folder, choose add new item, and you can choose SQL Server database. All right. As it says, be careful when deploying these to a production environment. If you replace the data file, then all the existing data will be lost. All they're saying is if you do decide that you're going to move it someplace, you're going to have to change your connection string, and you're responsible for making sure that you've got a copy of the original data. All right. Connection pooling says opening a new connection to a database can take a few seconds. That's not what's important. What's important with connection pooling is you only have a certain number of these connections. So the idea is you should open the connection, do the job, get the heck out, and close it. All right, you shouldn't keep it open. We've talked link before, language integrated query, sometimes called two-line integrated query. And as it says, it bridges the gap between the world of objects and the world of data. What I mentioned was it's kind of like when you look at this example here, it is kind of like taking SQL and standing it on its head because you put the select statement last. The rest of it doesn't look much different, really, from what we've talked about in regular SQL. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. And he's got a few examples of that in there. Again, you can use it also for joins. Put order by in there. You can do grouping, etc. Some of the major link methods are shown right here. And again, it's not my goal to sit there and read to you. All right? But virtually anything that we've done with SQL, you can do here. Now, these are kind of important because you're going to see these as we go on, the ones that are here. As it says, first by default returns only the first item. The reason that that's important is what comes after it. Notice if there are no items to return, it throws an exception, so the program will stop. You may use something like that if you are supposed to have data in a database. That way, if you did not, it would literally be erroneous. All right. Notice the difference between that and first or default. Both of them return only the first item, but first throws an exception if there's nothing in there. Default returns null if there's nothing in there. All right. You can also put a clause in here that says return the first only that meets this criteria. So maybe I only want customers from Missouri. If I've got customers from all over the Midwest, let's say. All right. And they've got the first and the first are default. All right. Some counting things. Any, as it says, returns true if any items are in the result set. So if anything has been met. Any clause is the same thing, but you can put a where clause in there. All, as it says, returns true if the clause is true for all items in a result set. So for instance, I could check and say, I only want to do this if all the people in the department are full-time, as an example. Count returns the number of items in the set. Count with a clause returns the number of items that meet criteria. Aggregation, we don't have to go over this. You know what sum is. You know what average is. You know what min is. You know what max is. No new ones there. You know what order by is. If you look up on the screen, there's a new one here. Then by. Which means order by this one, then order by this one. It's like putting in an order by some field comma, then another field comma. It's a shortcut, for lack of better words. All right. Other methods are shown here. Select projects each item into a new form. Skip is a big one. Discards the first n items and keeps the rest. So maybe I don't want to see that, maybe I just want to see the middle of something. Take gets the first items and disregards the rest. Distinct, you know what that is. To list, we've looked at. Execute the query and store the results in the list. Warning, if you call it too early, you will be downloading a lot more data than you need, which will hurt application performance. You remember we talked about lazy loading and eager loading? Part of being able to do this stuff is knowing when to actually call a query. And that's it. The other thing that he talked about in here a little bit, I don't think this is very long, but search pages. If you look up on the screen, you have seen this before. When a table contains a foreign key, you can use what are called navigation properties. It says they can be added to make traversing the data easier. Navigation properties should also be marked with the word virtual. Again, that does that lazy loading. That says do not load this until it's needed. So you can tell by looking here, there is going to be a relationship between the product and category tables. All right. In other words, any one category can have 0 or more products. Every product belongs to just one category. Okay. So we've got the virtual here, and here we've got a virtual also, and you've seen this because we did this, where we've got a collection of products in there. Terminology, am I right in assuming if you look on the screen here, you know what each one of these terms mean? So if you were to be tested on them at a later time, that you know what searching is, you know what filtering is, you know what sorting is, you know what paging is. I mean, we've talked about them before. You can search for a phrase within multiple properties. Well, again, the big thing right here in this code that is now in blue is that is what? It's a lambda expression. You're going to stick the results in P, and the name has to contain whatever is in the search or the description or the category name. We looked at this last week when we wrote that real generic search feature where you could put in the letter A, and if the letter A was in a name or a description or whatever, it would find it. Typically, that's not going to help you that much. Typically, you're going to want to make it more granular and just check for a description containing something or a name containing something. All right? Adding a search bar or box to a nav bar. Now, you wouldn't be tested on this, but again, we did this last week when we went through chapter 4. We looked at this. Again, please look up at the screen. Anybody who does not understand the distinction between get and post. So again, if you are given something like that on a test, you should be able to tell the difference between them. One thing we started talking about, but didn't spend a whole heck of a lot of time on, was this concept of a view model. And as it says, you can use ViewBag, but it becomes clumsy and messy if you're passing too much data. All right. So rather than using ViewBag, if you're moving a lot of data around, it's better, as it says there, to use a view model. All right. And you use the view model for the purposes of passing information from a controller to a view. The view is then based on the model rather than being based on the domain model. The domain model is basically what's in the model itself. So, to use a view model, I'm not reading to you. You can take a look up on the screen. All right. You typically, since it is a model class, you add it to the model folder. And as it says, you populate it in the action method and you pass it. Now, what's confusing about this is like, okay, fine, I sort of even get that. Why do you use a view model versus a model view controller versus this? They're all different ways, basically, of doing the same thing. If you want more on that, as it says here, you can go to pages 52 through 58 in the Naylor book. All right. Paging, remember when we did this last week? We went into NuGet and we added that. I at least showed that to you. And you saw it after a while that when we had more than 3 records, it gave us a second page indicator. Tracing is one thing we probably haven't talked about at all. All right. If you turn tracing on, it says here you can see the SQL that is executed using tracing, and that's true. Okay, that's if you log the database. You can set tracing on for an entire program. Then every time a line gets executed, you'll get a message on screen telling you what just happened. Routing. Did I do a good enough job of explaining this last week when we looked at that example, the miles per gallon thing, and I showed you how I had to add new routes so the system understood what I was trying to do? So what we're saying here is this probably will always be your last route. That's the generic one. That's your home route. All right. So if I had other controllers, I'd put them in here. And I can tell the system exactly when I click something, exactly what I want to have happen. Does that make sense? So that's it, where they said you can add your own new routes. Okay. And here's examples. Okay. Very similar to the stuff we looked at the other day. So, let me print anything out here or not.